So we have the central nervous system first and the peripheral nervous system. If you could tell me what's the difference in between those two? No?
Brain and the spinal cord, basically the center part of your being is what has
Mm-hmm.
and then your peripheral nerves is everything that branches off of that.
Exactly right. Okay. So peripheral nervous system is your actual, what we would call nerves too. The other ones, the brain and the spinal cord are made of neurons, but they're not necessarily nerves. Those nerves branch away from the central nervous system. Okay. And it is good if you want to take a couple notes on this. All right, so we have a couple different nerve types. Anybody know what's going on there?
Did you only say
Mm-hmm.
motor neuron, right?
Okay, so we have motor neurons. And what happens with motor neurons?
They control movement.
Okay. And what type are they, too? There's like two words and they sound almost the same, except they're one letter difference. Mm-hmm. So these ones would be the, well, this is sensory, which is afferent. Well, they're both here. So we have sensory, afferent, and then the motor would be signaled to go back. And that would be your efferent. So the way I remember it is cause and effect. Okay? So the afferent, affect, it's affecting your body, and then your effect would be to run and scream if there was a spider or something like that. Right? And then we have that it works with an interneuron in the central nervous system to cause action. So your inner neurons are basically those connectors that we were talking about.
Can I take a picture of that real quick?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you want, you can take pictures of it as we go through it. And again, I'll try to put this on YouTube before I leave. Mm-hmm. All right. So afferent or motor neurons. We have somatic or voluntary nervous system. Basically, that's what we actually cognitively think about. And does anybody know the other type that's not this? Autonomic or involuntary, which means you don't volunteer to do it, okay? Your body just does it. Controlled with smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, as well as glands can stimulate it. Reflexes are the exception. That, and if you ever have like a spasm, like sometimes my back will tighten up, that's an autonomic response I don't think about. But, yeah, so it's still autonomic because it's skeletal muscle, but I don't have to think about it. So. All right. So there are two different types of nerve pathways in the autonomic nervous system. First one is sympathetic division. This is our fight or flight response during extreme situations. Exercise, excitement, emergency, embarrassment, okay? Basically what happens here is you'll tunnel a bunch of blood to the extremities. This is what can cause people when they're stressed to put on a lot of weight because their sympathetic nervous system is powering all the time. And they're in fight or flight response a lot of the time. And the blood and other neural pathways aren't going to the core where they could be doing other work. Then we have parasympathetic. It's during resting and digesting. Okay? Promote normal body functions, digestion, defecation, diuresis. Okay? So, producing urine. Any questions there between those two? Yep. So that's something maybe we haven't talked a lot about yet. All right, I'm gonna skip that for now. Neuron structure. Who can tell me what these different parts are that I have labeled here? Big Nate? This one? Okay, so you're close. There's another. So the synapse is going to be at the end of it, but that's what joins it to another neuron. You know what I'm saying? It's the gap that it jumps. Brittany?
Like the little dots in the front. No.
This?
Yeah.
Okay.
Axon.
So this whole thing is an axon, right? Trying to think. There we go. So the whole thing is an axon. That's correct. Yep. So this one is actually a node of Rainier, which is where the electrical current would jump to when it jumps over the sheath. So then the sheath would be, yeah, that bottom, where that little red spot is. Got it?
It's the little, like, no, the big, it's like a square one. That one.
This one? Yeah.
Is that that one?
So it is a type of cell. You're right. It has a, it's fun to say Schwann cells, okay? And they were discovered by, I believe, Theodore Schwann, who's one of the main cell theorists. Brittany?
The one at the end.
This one? Okay, this one.
The motor end plate?
So they can join to a motor end plate, but this is an axon terminal. Okay? So the end of an axon terminated. Okay, terminal. Yes. That is very good. So if we're looking at that, where is the conduction going to go through? Where would it start and where would it end? Yes. Mm-hmm. So it starts at the axon and then goes this way? It goes the other way. So the axon is going to shoot stuff across to dendrites on another one and jump across there. Now, looking at your poster, what kind of neuron was this? Or maybe you remember. Right, it is a motor, and then is it... Did it say that? Oh, yeah. And then, is it uni, multi, or bi? Multi, right. It's able to take a bunch of different things from a bunch of different dendrites, go through the nucleus. So it's multi-pole there. Okay? Another good way of thinking about this is gray matter, white matter. White matter helps to speed up the impulses because if not, it would have to depolarize this whole segment. But once we throw our myelin sheaths on there, it can jump from node to node to node to node, and that's the only areas that needs to depolarize. So without those myelin sheaths, and some of you wrote about in your conclusion questions I graded last night, right, it would be really slow. And this is what happens with some people with neurological disorders. Okay, they can have trouble with their sheaths. Either it covers the whole thing, okay? And we're going to look at different neurological disorders sometime next week. Right. So we're going to look at situations. So paralysis is when you have a break in the spinal cord. Now, paralysis, basically you can't move, so it could cause like a type of paralysis, but typically when we think of paralysis, we think severing a spinal cord. All right, so generating an action potential. First step, do we remember? All right, So we're at rest. So the interior of the cell is slightly negative, has a bunch of K positives, and then we have the Na plus or sodium ions on the outside, and this is what causes it to be polarized. So it's at negative 70 millivolts when it's at rest. So you know you have a 9-volt battery. This is a millivolt, so it's 1,000 of 1 volt. Not a lot of charge. So when you get electrocuted, it's a big change in your voltage. Okay? Even just by a 9-volt, something like that. Alright? Then, we have a stimulus or a neurotransmitter that's going to jump from an axon terminal to your dendrites and then move down the next axon. Alright? This allows sodium to come inside and depolarize the cell, which basically means it reduces the charge on the membrane. We're switching that charge. It is only at a specific location, so this creates a graded potential. Again, I can pop this up at the end too. You can take more pictures. Here we see that fun little graph you drew yesterday. Okay. Then we get an influx, which is great enough to bring the cell interior to negative 50 millivolts, and then the threshold is breached. You can see it on the graph here. Then you have an action potential generated, and it's an all or none response. Okay? As soon as you break that negative 50 millivolts, it's going to send it all the way down. So you can have little fluctuations in your ions, but once it goes from negative 70 to negative 50, it's going to shoot all the way and cause a nerve impulse. After this, the interior of the cell will continue to gain sodium ions until it reaches positive 30 millivolts. Alright? Then the gated channels will switch. So the sodium ones will close, the potassium ones will open, and then that will repolarize the cell. Questions? This should be similar to what you saw yesterday. Alright? Another impulse cannot occur until repolarization occurs. So you can only send like one at a time there. Okay? So after that, sodium potassium pump is going to work the way we discussed earlier. You use 1 ATP, pump the 3 sodium out, then take the 2 potassiums back in. And this is basically what I just told you about depolarization, repolarization. To speed it up, it jumps from node to node by jumping over those myelin sheets until it reaches the axon terminal. And then the neurotransmitters can jump across the synapse there to dendrites on another axon. All right. So you can see these pictures of what it looks like. This is an axon terminal. Basically, if you remember exocytosis from when we discussed cells, how vesicles come up and then they shoot stuff out. These are different neurotransmitters. Some of the ones you may have heard of, it's like serotonin and dopamine, things like that. Those usually up in your brain. They regulate mood. For muscle contraction, acetylcholine is one of the major ones. Again, we'll talk about it. You don't necessarily need to have all the neurotransmitters memorized, but it's nice to know those. I am. Well, I'm going to share this video. So you can see with the synaptic transmission, presynaptic, post, so pre before, post after. And that's where you can see the electrical excitation. So synapse, the way I like to think of it is you have a quarterback throwing to a receiver, that's what happens. But it's like a bunch of them. So it'd be like 30 quarterbacks throwing the 30 receivers. And they all catch it, and then they shuttle the ball down the line. Okay? And then when you go to like a myelin sheet, it would be like if they toss the ball up over the sheet instead of just handing it all the way across. So that's a way to think about it.